In 1856, a runaway slave by the name of Dred Scott had sought to gain freedom in a free state, the state of Kansas. The case was so important at that time in America that it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the very infamous Dred Scott decision that was rendered by the fanatical Roman Catholic judge by the name of Taney. He was the Chief Justice of the United States at that time. And his decision, the Taney decision in a nutshell, was that the Negro had no rights which the white man had to respect. This basically said that the Negro or the black man had no rights. Abraham Lincoln as a child had watched the unfolding of the selling of young slaves, young black men and women on a slave block in a small Illinois town. And he and his friend had come out of the woods and had watched, and he turned to his friend and he said, "Someday I'm going to hit it hard." Abraham Lincoln would hit that hard, and Judge Taney's Supreme Court bench had certainly fanned the flames in 1856. But a year before that, in November of 1855, Abraham Lincoln drew upon him the fire of the Roman Catholic Church when he answered a wire from a priest, a Catholic priest of Kankakee, Illinois. The priest's name was Charles Chiniquy. Charles Chiniquy had been engaged in a series of court suits with the bishop of the Chicago diocese, of which he was a subject. Charles Chiniquy's case had been so publicized in the Illinois press that no lawyers wanted to defend him. They realized that they weren't fighting against a priest in Chicago. They were fighting against the Roman Catholic Church. So no lawyer would defend Charles Chiniquy. But Charles Chiniquy learned that there was a very loyal and a very upright lawyer in Illinois by the name of Abe Lincoln. Chiniquy sent Lincoln a wire asking for his services, and within 20 minutes of Chiniquy's wire, he got a reply that said, "Yes, I will defend your life and your honor at the next May term of the court at Urbana." Signed, A. Lincoln. From Chiniquy's book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, on page 273, we read where it says, "The time arrived when the sheriff of Kankakee had to drag me again as a criminal and a prisoner to Urbana and deliver me into the hands of the sheriff of that city. I arrived there on the 20th of October with my lawyers, Messrs. Osgood and Paddock. Mr. Abe Lincoln had preceded me only by a few minutes from Springfield." So there were a few other lawyers that would help Charles Chiniquy. When Charles Chiniquy was defended by Abraham Lincoln, we find on page 41 of the book by Burke McCarty entitled "The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln," where she says this: "Lincoln then went on and depicted the career of Priest Chiniquy, how he had been unjustly persecuted, and in conclusion Lincoln said, 'As long as God gives me a heart to feel, a brain to think, or a hand to execute my will. I shall devote it against that power which has attempted to use the machinery of the courts to destroy the rights and character of an American citizen. This promise made by Abraham Lincoln in his mature years, he also kept. Burke McCarty goes on and says that in the famous Dred Scott decision that was in favor of slavery, Abraham Lincoln fully understood that the motive power behind that decision was Rome. Abe Lincoln made a lot of enemies. In fact, we find that when Abe Lincoln, as he left the courtroom, the day that Charles Chiniquy was acquitted and was set free in the courts of Urbana, Illinois, when it was made clear that Charles Chiniquy had been unjustly accused, that the priests of Chicago and St. Louis had gotten somebody to lie to try to destroy Charles Chiniquy. After that trial was over, as they left the courtroom, Charles Chiniquy was in tears. And Abraham Lincoln said, "But Mr. Chiniquy, why are you in tears? You won. You should be filled with joy." And Priest Chiniquy stated, "Mr. Lincoln, I saw in the courtroom today, from Chicago and St. Louis, 10 to 12 Jesuits, and I saw in their eyes your death." Abraham Lincoln, as far back as 1855 and 1856, was already a marked man, one that Rome would seek to remove. Abraham Lincoln, of course, 4 years later in 1860, was voted in as the President of the United States. And as Abe Lincoln made his way from Illinois to Washington, D.C., Lincoln had to pass through the city of Baltimore. And we read again in Chiniquy's book, page 292, 50 Years in the Church of Rome. Abraham Lincoln said, "I'm so glad to see you again, Mr. Chiniquy. You see that your friends, the Jesuits, have not yet killed me. They would have surely done it when I passed through their most devoted city of Baltimore, had I not passed by incognito a few hours before they expected me. We have proof that the company which had been selected and organized to murder me was led by a rabid Roman Catholic called Byrne. It was almost entirely composed of Roman Catholics. More than that, there were 2 disguised priests among them to lead and encourage them. I saw Mr. Morse, the learned inventor. He told me that when he was in Rome, he found out the proofs of a most formidable conspiracy against this country and its institutions. It is evident that it is to the intrigues and emissaries of the Pope that we owe, in great part, the horrible civil war which is threatening to cover the country with blood and ruins. I am sorry that Professor Morse had to leave Rome before he could know more about the secret plans of the Jesuits against the liberties and the very existence of this country." What a tragedy. What a tragedy. from the book called The Suppressed Truth about the assassination, page 113, we read this. 20 men had been hired in Baltimore to assassinate the president-elect on his way to Washington. The leader of this band was an Italian refugee, a barber well known in Baltimore. Their plan was, when Mr. Lincoln arrived in that city, the assassins were to mix with the crowd and get as near his person as possible and shoot at him with their pistols. If he was in a carriage, hand grenades had been prepared, filled with detonating powder, such as Orsini used in attempting to assassinate Louis Napoleon. These were to be thrown into the carriage, and to make the work of death doubly sure, pistols were to be discharged into the vehicle at the same moment. The assassins had a vessel lying ready to receive them in the harbor. From thence they would be carried to Mobile in the seceded state of Alabama. I'm sorry, that's taken from John Smith Dye's book called The Adder's Den, page 113. We find in Burke McCarty's book where she talks about the same thing. An Italian barber, a Romanist, was to have him stabbed as he came through Baltimore. In Burke McCarty's book as well, we read these words in a famous letter that was written to John Wilkes Booth, in which it was stated, it was called the Charles Selby letter. It was brought forward as evidence in the trial of the assassins of Abraham Lincoln. And it stated in there, this was Charles Selby writing to John Wilkes Booth, quoted from Burke McCarty's book, The Suppressed Truth, about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, where Charles Selby said to John Wilkes Booth, "The cup failed us once and might again." So not only did the Roman Catholic Church try to assassinate Abraham Lincoln before he ever reached Washington, D.C., they also tried to poison him as well. This letter that we just read from by Charles Selby, it was found on the floor of the car which Booth dropped and which was transmitted to the War Department November 17, 1864. The letter was delivered to President Lincoln, who after reading it wrote the word assassination across it and filed it in his office, where it was found after his death and was placed in evidence as a court exhibit. That too is from Burke McCarty's book on page 131. I could read the letter in its entirety. It's written by Charles Selby. I'll just read a few parts of it. He says this: "Abe must die, and now. You can choose your weapons: the cup, the knife, the bullet. The cup failed us once and might again. You know where to find your friends. Your disguisers are so perfect and complete that without one knew your face, no police telegraphic dispatch would catch you. Strike for your home, strike for your country, bide your time, but strike sure." And the judge in the trial of the assassins of Abraham Lincoln, Judge Bingham, declared this: "Although this letter would imply that the assassination spoken of was to take place speedily, Yet the party was to bide his time. The letter declares that Abraham Lincoln must die, and now, meaning as soon as the agents can be employed and the work done. They tried to poison Abraham Lincoln. They tried to blow him up. If that didn't work, they also were ready to shoot him. These are the emissaries of the Pope, the Jesuit order. From the book The Adder's Den, page 135, we get a little flavor for the day Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated. It says it was a dark day in our country's history. John Smith Dye, by the way, who wrote this book, was an eyewitness of this very occurrence. It was a dark day in our country's history when an armed guard had to surround the Willards Hotel, where the chief magistrate had taken temporary lodgings, to prevent his assassination. And on the day, March 4th, 1861, of his inauguration, Abraham Lincoln was escorted up Pennsylvania Avenue in a hollow square of Calvary. And the utmost vigilance, was exercised by General Winfield Scott to prevent his being publicly assassinated on the way to the Capitol to deliver his inaugural address from the East Portico. These were terrible times. When you begin to think about the Council of Vienna and Metternich and the Pope and the Jesuit order's plans to destroy this country, to destroy its freedoms, to destroy Protestantism, and to kill presidents, attempts on Andrew Jackson's life, the assassination of William Henry Harrison, the assassination of Zachary Taylor, the attempted assassination of Franklin Pierce, the attempted assassination of James Buchanan, the attempted assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and then finally his assassination. What does that tell you about the evil, vicious, malicious character of the Jesuits of Rome? May God help us never to have anything to do with this satanic, sinister power. In Charles Chiniquy's book, page 302, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, Abraham Lincoln stated this: "So many plots have already been made against my life. It's a miracle that they have all failed, when we consider that the great majority of them were in the hands of the skillful Roman Catholic murderers trained by Jesuits. But can we expect that God will make a perpetual miracle to save my life? I believe not. The Jesuits are so expert in those deeds of blood that Henry IV said it was impossible to escape them. He became their victim, though he did all that could be done to protect himself. My escape from their hands since the letter of the Pope to Jeff Davis has sharpened 1,000,000 of daggers to pierce my breast would be more than a miracle. But just as the Lord heard no murmur from the lips of Moses when he told him that he had to die before crossing the Jordan for the sins of his people, so I hope and pray that he will hear no murmur from me when I fall for my nation's sake. The only two favors I ask of the Lord are that I may die for the sacred cause in which I am engaged, and when I am the standard bearer of the rights and liberties of my country. The second favor I ask of God is that my dear son Robert, when I am gone, will be one of those who lift up that flag of liberty which will cover my tomb, and will carry it with honor and fidelity to the end of his life as his father did, surrounded by the millions who will be called with him to fight and die for the defense and honor of our country. Abraham Lincoln understood that his time was near, and he prayed that he would be found faithful. And in his inaugural address, this is what this man that heaven used declared. Chinickley's book 306 and 307. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by another drawn by the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. And down on the same page we read, in the midst of unparalleled success, while all the bells of the land were ringing with joy, a calamity fell upon us which overwhelmed the country. On Friday evening, April 14, President Lincoln attended Ford's Theater in Washington. He was sitting quietly in his box listening to the drama when a man entered the door of the lobby leading to the box, closing the door behind him. Drawing near to the president, he drew from his pocket a small pistol and shot him in the back of the head. As the president fell, senseless and mortally wounded, and the shriek of his wife, who was seated at his side, pierced every ear, the assassin leaped from the box, a perpendicular height of 9 feet, and as he rushed across the stage, bareheaded, brandished a dagger, exclaiming, "Sic semper tyrannis," and disappeared behind the side scenes. Abraham Lincoln had finally been killed by the Jesuits and their tools of Rome. Chinickley's book, page 308 and 309. It says, "Noble Abraham, true descendant of the father of the faithful, honest in every trust, humble as a child, tender-hearted as a woman, who could not bear to injure even his most envenomed foes, who in the hour of triumph was saddened lest the feelings of his adversaries should be wounded by their defeat, with charity for all and malice towards none, endowed with common sense, intelligence never surpassed, with power of intellect which enabled him to grapple with the most gigantic opponents in debates, developing abilities as a statesman, which won the gratitude of his country and the admiration of the world, dies by the bullet of the assassin. Who was that assassin? Booth was nothing but the tool of the Jesuits. It was Rome who directed his arm after corrupting his heart and damning his soul. Page 309, Chiniquy says, and after 20 years of constant and most difficult researches, I come today before the American people to say and prove that the President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by the priests and the Jesuits of Rome. In the book of the testimonies given in the prosecution of the assassination of Lincoln, published by Ben Pittman, and in the 2 volumes of the trial of John Surratt in 1867, we have the legal and irrefutable proof that the plot of the assassins of Lincoln was matured, if not started, in the house of Mary Surratt, 561 H Street, Washington, D.C. The sworn testimonies show that it was the common rendezvous of the priests of Washington. What does the presence of so many priests in that house reveal to the world? No man of common sense who knows anything about the priests of Rome can doubt that they were the advisors, the counselors, the very soul of that infernal plot. Those priests who were the personal friends and the father confessors of Booth, John Surratt, Mrs. and Miss Surratt, could not be constantly there without knowing what was going on, particularly when we know that every one of those priests was a rabid rebel in heart, every one of them knowing that his infallible Pope had called Jeff Davis his dear son and had taken the Southern Confederacy under his protection, was bound to believe that the most holy thing a man could do was to fight for the Southern cause by destroying those who were its enemies. Read the history of the assassination of Admiral Coligny, Henry III and IV, William the Taciturn, by the hired assassins of the Jesuits, and compare them with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. You will find that one resembles the other like 2 drops of water. You will understand that they all come from the same source, Rome. At this point in our tape, let's turn it over to side. Welcome to side 2 of our tape on Abraham Lincoln. We're going to pick up with another quote from Charles Chiniquy's 50 Years in the Church of Rome, page 310, where it says, that arch-rebel could give the money, speaking of Jeff Davis, but the Jesuits alone could select the assassins, train them, and show them a crown of glory in heaven if they would kill the author of the bloodshed, the famous renegade and apostate, the enemy of the Pope and the Church, Abe Lincoln. Who does not see the lessons given by the Jesuits to Booth in their daily intercourse in Mary Surratt's house when he reads those lines written by Booth a few hours before his death? I can never repent. God made me the instrument of his punishment. Compare these words with the doctrines and principles taught by the councils, the decrees of the Pope, and the laws of Holy Inquisition, and you will find that the sentiments and belief of Booth flow from those principles as the river flows from its source. And that pious Miss Surratt, who the very next day after the murder of Lincoln said without being rebuked in the presence of several other witnesses The death of Abraham Lincoln is no more than the death of any nigger in the army. Where did she get that maxim if not from her church? Had not that church recently proclaimed, through their devoted Roman Catholic Judge Taney and his Dred Scott decision, that the Negroes have no rights which the white is bound to respect? By bringing the president on a level with the lowest nigger, Rome was saying that he had no right even to his life. Chiniquy goes on. And discusses the fact that John Surratt, who was a part of the conspiracy to assassinate Abraham Lincoln, right after the assassination, John Surratt went to Montreal, and from Montreal he was taken to Liverpool in England on a ship. And from Liverpool, John Surratt was taken down to Rome. And when a United States official finally caught up and got John Surratt was found in the Pope's personal army, a conspirator in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Was a part of the Pope's personal army. We find another story in Charles Chiniquy's book on pages 316 and 317. Where Charles Chiniquy declares this, and I'm going to read it in its entirety. Pages 316 and 317. It says, 3 or 4 hours before Lincoln was murdered in Washington, the 14th of April, 1865. That murder was not only known by someone, but it was circulated and talked of in the streets and in the houses of the priestly and Romish town of St. Joseph, Minnesota. The facts are undeniable, the testimonies are unchallengeable, and there were no railroad nor any telegraph communications nearer than 40 or 80 miles from St. Joseph. Mr. Linneman, who was a Roman Catholic, tells us that though he heard this from many in his store and in the streets, he doesn't remember the name of a single one who told him that. But if the memory of Mr. Linneman is so deficient on that subject, we can help him and tell him what with mathematical accuracy. The priests of St. Joseph were often visiting Washington and boarding at Mrs. Surratt's home. Those priests were in daily communication with their co-rebel priests of St. Joseph, Minnesota. They were intimate friends. There were no secrets among them. The details of the murder, the day selected for its carrying out, were as well known among the priests of St. Joseph as they were among those of Washington. How could the priests conceal such a joyful event from their friend Mr. Linneman? He was their confidential man. He was their purveyor. He was their right-hand man among the faithful of St. Joseph. The death of Abraham Lincoln was known 4 hours before its occurrence in the Roman Catholic town of St. Joseph, Minnesota. What actually occurred was, in the afternoon, about 6 p.m., in the town of St. Joseph, a man came up and stated, "I have just been told that President Lincoln and Secretary of State Seward have been killed. The next day, the 15th of April, this gentleman by the name of Bennett said, "I was at St. Cloud, a town about 12 miles away, and I asked several people if they had heard about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and they told me they had heard nothing about it. But the next day, the 16th day of April, when going to the church in St. Cloud, a friend gave me a copy of a telegram sent to him the day before, stating that Abe Lincoln and Secretary Seward had been killed the day before, which was Friday the 14th. The question is, how could the priests of St. Joseph known before anybody else knew that Lincoln had been killed? And as we have already found, they knew because they were in cahoots with the priests of Rome, of Washington, D.C. And they had planned and plotted the exact place and time when all of this was going to happen, so that they could say without a doubt that Lincoln was dead. Now, there's so much more material. In a statement from the book by Burke McCarty, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Lincoln, page 185, in the trial of John Surratt, a French minister by the name of Rufus King stated this: "I believe that John Surratt is protected by the clergy, and that the murder is the result of a deep-laid plot, not only against the life of President Lincoln, but against the existence of this republic, as we are aware that priesthood and royalty are and always have been opposed to liberty." Now, there were 4 people that were killed for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Their names were Davy Harold, Louis Payne, George Atzt Surratt, and Mary E. Surratt. They were all Roman Catholics. You can find that information in Ford's Theater. If you go down the winding corridor at Ford's Theater, you find several glass cases showing many things about Lincoln and the Civil War and his assassination. And it shows that these 4 people were all hung and that they were all Roman Catholic. Now let's just discuss this aspect of it for a moment. As Abraham Lincoln was being assassinated, William Seward, the Secretary of State for these United States, there was also an attempt on his life. There was also to be an attempt on the life of Ulysses S. Grant. But Ulysses S. Grant had to take an emergency train to New Jersey to be at the bedside of a sick and dying relative. Andrew Johnson, the then Vice President of the United States, was also to be assassinated at this very time. But the man who was to kill him became scared and went off riding on a horse into the country and didn't carry out his part of the plan. In regards to William Seward, we find in the book called The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln by Burke McCarty on page 121. Lewis Payne, who was known as the Florida Boy, an athletic young giant, had joined the conspiracy, rode up to the front of the residence of the Secretary of State, William Seward. William Seward had been ill for 3 weeks, suffering from a fractured jaw, the result of the running away of his team of horses, and was under the constant care of male nurses. Lewis Payne rang the doorbell and was answered by the butler. He told the latter he had been sent with some medicine which he must take to William Seward. The butler refused to allow him to enter, saying that he had orders to allow no one to go to Mr. Seward's room. Lewis Payne, after a short struggle, knocked the butler down and went right up the stairs. He rushed into the chamber where Seward was. He fell both of Seward's sons who were in the room. One of Seward's sons received a fracture of the skull, from which he never fully recovered. Lewis Payne then sprang upon Seward and seriously stabbed him 3 times. By a superhuman effort, Seward struggled out of bed, with his assailant, who left him in a heap on the floor, bleeding from the wounds he had inflicted. After his murderous assault on Seward, Lewis Payne rushed down the stairs yelling, "I am mad! I am mad!" And Lewis Payne probably was. He was entirely under the control of the hypnotic influences of the wicked people in whose power he had allowed himself to be. On page 122 of McCarty's book, it says, it was part of the plan that Michael O'Laughlin, one of the conspirators from Baltimore, was to have murdered General Grant that night, but this was not possible owing to the change in Grant's plans. To Atzerodt, it fell to assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson. But Atzerodt became frightened and spent the day riding into the country on a horse, and he was found several days after with relatives of his below Washington. He made a written confession before he was executed, which confirmed the presence of John Surratt in Washington that fatal day, a fact which 9 reputable witnesses had also sworn to. So we had a conspiracy to kill not only the President of the United States, but to completely bring into chaos the government of the United States of America. Do we not see the fulfillment of the Council of Vienna and Verona at work in 1865? Do we not see the hand of the Jesuit order and the Roman Catholic Church to destroy this great country of ours? It's an awful time. It was an awful time in the history of the United States. What about this Civil War? We noticed already from Chiniquy that the Roman Catholic Church sowed the seeds of division between the 2 great sections of this country, dividing north from south on the burning question of slavery. That division, according to Chiniquy, was her golden opportunity to crush one by the other and reign over the bloody ruins of both. Rome hoped that the hour of her supreme triumph over this continent was come. She ordered the Emperor of France to be ready with an army in Mexico, ready to support the South. She bade all Roman Catholics to enroll themselves under the banners of slavery by joining themselves to the Democratic Party. And then the Catholic Church, from other documents that I have read, pushed the English army into Canada, ready to come down from the north and crush the Union. Chiniquy also declares without Romanism the last civil war would have been impossible. Jeff Davis would never have dared to attack the north had he not had assurance from the Pope that the Jesuits, the bishops, the priests, and the whole people of the Church of Rome would help him. These diabolical and antisocial laws of Rome caused a Roman Catholic Beauregard to be the man chosen to fire the first gun at Fort Sumter. Those antisocial laws caused the Pope of Rome to be the only crowned prince in the whole world so depraved as to publicly shake hands with Jeff Davis and proclaim him president of a legitimate government. Abraham Lincoln, page 294 of Chiniquy's book, and 295. I will be forever grateful for the warning words you addressed to me about the dangers ahead to my life from Rome. I know they are not imaginary dangers. If I were fighting against a Protestant South as a nation, there would be no danger of assassination. The nations who read the Bible fight bravely on the battlefields, but they do not assassinate their enemies. The Pope and the Jesuits, with their infernal Inquisition, are the only organized powers in the world which have recourse to the dagger of the assassin to murder those whom they cannot convince with their arguments or conquer with the sword. Unfortunately, I feel more and more every day that it is not against the Americans of the South alone I am fighting. It is more against the Pope of Rome, his perfidious Jesuits, and their blind and bloodthirsty slaves. As long as they hope to conquer the North, they will spare me. But the day we rout their armies, take their cities, and force them to submit, then it is my impression that the Jesuits, who are the principal rulers of the South, will do what they have almost invariably done in the past. The dagger or the pistol will do what the strong hands of the warriors could not achieve. It is Rome who wants to rule and degrade the North, as she has ruled and degraded the South from the very day of its discovery. There are only very few of the Southern leaders who are not more or less under the influence of the Jesuits through their wives, family relations, and friends. Several members of the family of Jeff Davis belong to the Church of Rome. It is very certain that if the American people could learn what I know of the fierce hatred of the priests of Rome against our institutions, our schools, our most sacred rights, and our so dearly bought liberties, they would drive them away tomorrow from among us, or they would shoot them as traitors. But you are the only one to whom I reveal these sad secrets, for I know that you learned them before me. The history of these last 1,000 years tells us that wherever the Church of Rome is not a dagger to pierce the bosom of a free nation. She is a stone to her neck, to paralyze her and prevent her advance in the ways of civilization. Science, intelligence, happiness, and liberty. Again, 296. This war, Lincoln said, would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to the popery that we now see our land redden with the blood of her noblest sons. I pity the priests, the bishops, and the monks of Rome and the United States when the people realize that they are in great part responsible for the tears and the blood shed in this war. Chiniquy stated to Lincoln, secret letters were addressed from Rome to the bishops, ordering them to weaken your armies by detaching those men from you. So many soldiers were told, deserted. In fact, history records for us that after the Pope declared that Jefferson Davis was the president of the South and that the Pope recognized him as the ruler of the Confederacy, and that Abe Lincoln was a heretic, that many, many hundreds of thousands of Roman Catholic soldiers in the Union Army deserted to the Southern forces. 298, Lincoln says to Chiniquy, you are perfectly correct when you say it was to detach the Roman Catholics who had enrolled themselves in our armies. Since the publication of the Pope's letter, a great number of them have deserted their banners and turned traitor. It is true also that General Meade has remained with us and gained the bloody battle of Gettysburg. But how could he lose it when he was surrounded by such heroes as Howard, Reynolds, Buford, Wadsworth, Cutler, Slocum, Sickles, Hancock, Barnes? But it is evident that even General Meade allowed his Romanism to supersede his patriotism after the battle at Gettysburg. He let the army of Lee escape when he could easily have cut his retreat, and forced him to surrender after losing nearly the half of his soldiers in the last 3 days of carnage. When Meade was to order the pursuit after the battle, a stranger came in haste to his headquarters. That stranger was a disguised Jesuit. After 10 minutes, Meade made such arrangements for the pursuit of the enemy that Lee escaped almost untouched with the loss of only 2 guns. One other statement, 305 of Charles Chiniquy. The common people see and hear, this is Abraham Lincoln, they see and hear the big noisy wheels of the Southern Confederacy's cars. They call them Jeff Davis, Lee, Toombs, Beauregard, Semmes, and they honestly think they are the motive power. But this is a mistake. The true motive power is secreted behind the thick walls of the Vatican, the colleges and schools of the Jesuits, the convents of the nuns, and the confessional boxes